Hello, we're going to take a look here at the argumentative FRQ for the 2020 AP US Government and Politics exam. After looking at some of your thesis statements on our thesis practice that we did, I wanted to create some clarification because it looks like there's a little bit of confusion, and this can be confusing because when we hear thesis statement in high school, we've probably been taught a million different ways. And the thesis and claim for the argumentative FRQ and AP Gov is different from a thesis that you would make in AP US History or AP World History, and certainly different from a thesis that you would see in an English or a language arts class. So the thesis statement has to have three key components in order to get the full thesis point on the AP Government exam. Number one, a defensible claim, which means that it can be argued, right? You're either on one side or the other. And as I mentioned to you in class, we can be tempted to get into nuance on some of these discussions because there is plenty of room for nuance. I agree. As you know, Mr. Murphy enjoys talking about nuance and shades of belief and different interpretations of different concepts. But for the purposes of this argumentative essay, it's easier to make an argument when your position is clear, when it is defensible. Okay. Responds to the question, right? So this is important. You're going to have to ask yourself, okay, what is the question asking me? It's going to have you take some type of position, but what is the position? What is the topic? What is the concept that's being assessed here? And then the last part, and this is where we struggle with, is establishing a line of reasoning. So that means that you've not only taken a defensible position, but you've told me logically how you've arrived at that position. Establishing a line of reasoning is answering the question, why? Why is that your claim? Not answering the question of what, which is evidence, but why. So think of it as a because statement. You're justifying your claim. So here's some ways to think about it. X is your defensible claim in response to the prompt, and then A, B, and C are reasons why you make that claim. Very simple, not complex. The recipe for a thesis statement is very simple. X because of A, B, and C, right? C is your spare tire, assuming that you're going to use a separate piece of evidence for A and a separate piece of evidence for B. You could do A because, or X because A and B, or you could do X because A and use two pieces of evidence to support the claim you make in A. That's a little bit trickier because it could be, you may run the risk of putting all of your eggs in one basket, right? That's how come I like to have that spare tire of a C claim with additional evidence. But certainly at a minimum, I would go X because of A and B. So let's take a look at some examples of how that looks, okay? Let's say I was given a prompt, develop an argument that takes a position on the role of the media in influencing elections. So I have to take a position, I have to make a defensible claim, and my topic is the role of the media in influencing elections. Okay, so that's going to come into our Unit 4 and 5 topics there. So in green, I have my X, I have my claim. And then I have my justifications, my because highlighted in the pink and in the orange. So I've taken two different positions on this by way of example. The media play a limited role in influencing elections. That's a defensible claim because you could argue that the role is not limited. In fact, I do in the second example. Why do I say that? Because of the variety of media options available and the relatively limited number of undecided voters. Those are my justifications. Those are my reasons why I think the media plays a limited role in influencing elections. My evidence will come in my explanation part. My thesis statement is only giving me a preview of the argument. It's giving your reader a preview of the argument. The point is that I need to read the first sentence of your FRQ and know what your FRQ is about. You don't need to give me any flowery language or fluff. Just lay it on the line. Okay, the second example, structured similarly, but it takes a different view with different justifications. The media have a significant influence on elections because they set the public policy agenda and shape public perceptions of candidates for office. I will explain why those reasons support my claim by using evidence. Okay, that's where the evidence, reasoning, and analysis score comes in for our FRQ, argumentative FRQ. So, evidence and reasoning, what does that look like? So, evidence is used to support your line of reasoning. Okay, the mistake I see among students often is they will say, because of, and then give me an evidence point, right? I believe this because Article 2 of the Constitution. No, Article 2 of the Constitution would be an example of evidence. It would be a piece of evidence, but it would not be your justification. Okay, so evidence is used to support the line of reasoning. Evidence does not replace the line of reasoning. Okay, A, B, and C will each have associated evidence with it, and you'll see that in the examples that I provide. One piece of evidence must come from the foundational documents listed, and then the second piece of evidence can come from any other source. Now, if you are using your C, or if you're using a third piece of evidence, your spare tire that I've talked about, that too should come from one of the other foundational documents listed. Okay, that way, you're creating a spare tire that can cover for you in case your original foundational document tire goes flat, because the prompt or the rubric requires at least one foundational document being used with your analysis and reasoning. Okay, these are our point values for our rubric. You get 1 point for including evidence relevant to the topic. You get a second point for explaining evidence and how it's connected to the topic. And then you get your 3 points for explaining how the evidence supports the claim. Remember, one of the things I always tell you is show, don't tell. It's not enough just to say, hey, Article 2 proves my point. It's not enough to say Article 2 talks about executive power, therefore it proves my point. No, what is it about Article 2? This is how you get that third point for each of your reasons. What is it about Article 2 that supports the specific claim, the defensible claim that you've taken? Remember, it's a defensible claim. So that third point is you defending that claim using the evidence that you're writing about. An example of some structure here. Again, there's no strict formula, but A is demonstrated clearly. A, remember, that was our because, that was our justification. A is demonstrated clearly in this evidence because then you tell me what the evidence shows about A. That's how you get that second point, which supports X, that's my claim, because explanation of why the evidence supports your claim. That's how you get the third point. Okay, so it all loops back to your defensible claim, which is why the only way to maximize your points is to have a solid defensible claim that responds to the prompt at the beginning. Your thesis statement is going to give you the roadmap for the rest of your FRQ. So let's look at some examples here then. Going back to my original thesis statements I gave you. The media play a limited role in influencing elections. That's my defensible claim. So both of my arguments, when I explain my evidence, have to tie back to that claim because of the variety of media options available and the relatively limited number of undecided voters. So let's start with my first justification clause, the variety of media options available. Let's say that because the First Amendment is part of one of our foundational documents, let's say that that was a required source for me to use. So I'm going to use the First Amendment in my explanation of justification A. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution establishes the freedom of the press, which allows for a variety of different media organizations to form with relatively little restrictions. I'm showing that I understand the document and how it connects to the topic. Now I need to tie it into my claim and explain, okay, what does this have to do with the point that you're making that the media play a limited role in influencing elections? Well, I explain that this creates a number of options for citizens to access information, and oftentimes people will seek information that supports their preconceived biases and opinions. I'm showing some level of analysis. I'm still not to the point, though, of telling the reader how that supports my defensible claim. That comes in this next part. Instead of the media influencing opinions and therefore elections, voters' pre existing views guide not only their votes, but where they obtain information. In fact, I buttress my argument by providing an example. Some candidates opt to bypass traditional media outlets altogether and use social media to directly access voters. With more and more options like this available, the impact of the media in elections then is minimized. I'm ending that explanation, the justification, by reminding my reader to go back to my claim. Okay, and that also helps me in my response to stay grounded in the claim that I make. Okay, let's look at my second justification along with my second piece of evidence. While the media play an important role as a linkage institution, the reality is that the electorate has grown more polarized in recent elections. As a result, the number of truly undecided voters has declined. Parties and candidates have focused instead on turning out their base supporters rather than persuading new voters. This new focus, so that's my information from content. That's my content knowledge from the last two units being showcased there. So I can use content knowledge as evidence. This new focus on campaign, this new focus on campaigning minimizes the media influence of elections because base voters have already decided which candidate to support, irrespective of media coverage. So that last sentence was my tie back to my claim. Okay, let's look at this from a different direction. Okay, this is the opposite point. The media have significant influence on elections because they set the public policy agenda, straight up content, right? And they shape public perceptions of candidates for office. Let's look at how I explain and use evidence to support my first justification there. As a linkage institution, a key role of media entities is shaping the public policy agenda by serving as gatekeepers, deciding which information or news items get coverage and which do not. Now, technically, that slice of content can be my evidence. But if I have to tie it into a foundational document, this is where I'm going to bring in my First Amendment. While elected officials and candidates can attempt to shape this, the First Amendment protects the freedom of the press, which provides news organizations autonomy in determining what news to cover and what not to cover. Topics that the media choose to cover could influence voting behavior by narrowing the focus of voters in an election, causing them to ignore issues or concerns that some candidates may raise, but that aren't part of media coverage. Tying it back to my claim, at the same time, candidate messaging could shift to adjust to the agenda set by the media. Such a shift highlights another way this role of media influences elections. Okay, so I'm keeping the focus back on my claim, using my evidence, explaining my evidence, and my evidence is explained in terms of the topic of the prompt, right? There's lots of things that you could say about the First Amendment. There are lots of things you could say about freedom of the press. But the only thing that's relevant to this argument about freedom of the press in this context is that it allows the media to determine the public policy agenda. Okay? And then B, our next justification, explanation. The media typically focuses on horse race coverage, relying on public opinion polls, fundraising totals, and other parameters to generate a narrative about the viability of a candidate. Straight up content evidence. If, based on this narrative, voters sense that a candidate is not viable, they will be less likely to support that candidate. Okay? That's why this this is why this evidence from content is relevant to the current discussion. Now I need to tell why it's relevant to how does it support, how does it defend my claim? The narrative, in a way, becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. If voters perceive through media coverage others are not supporting a candidate, then they will be less inclined to support that candidate. This, this is the impact of the horse race narrative, i.e., the impact of the significant influence of the media on elections. Okay, so again, this is all about justifying your claim, right? Both my A and B tie back to I end my discussion of the evidence. I end my discussion of the evidence by tying it back to my claim. The key thing to remember about your FRQ is less is more, especially on your thesis statement. You're just simply giving a guidepost. I need to be able to know which direction you're headed in the first sentence. Number one. Number two, evidence is not justification. Okay. I cannot say the media have a significant influence on elections because of the First Amendment. No. What is it about the First Amendment that could cause the media to have a significant influence? Okay. So the a place for evidence is in your explanation, your analysis, your reasoning. It's not necessarily in your thesis statement. Your thesis statement is not about the what, it's about the why. Then when I get into my justification, I justify my reasons for making the claim. I tie in evidence to support those reasons, and then I explain how the evidence connects and reinforces my claim. Okay. If you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I've posted this Google slide on Google Classroom so that you can have it to review and hopefully kind of understand the structure of your argumentative FRQ. Good luck.